Hello everyone, Kyle here from Franklin Armory. I'm going to show you how to install your new binary firing system for your Stribog SP9 today. Alright everyone, let's see what comes in the package. We have our Stribog SP9 trigger pack here. We have our Selector barrel, which comes with the long Selector paddle. We have our short Selector paddle and its screw, and our two Selector stickers, if I can get it off the table. And you'll also need two tools to install this. You'll need a T10 Torx wrench and a 1/8 punch. All right, now let's grab our Stribog SP9. This one happens to be an A3S. First thing that we're gonna do is make sure that the firearm is unloaded. So we will pull back the charging handle and inspect the chamber, make sure there's no ammunition in the gun. Once it is clear and you have taken out the OEM trigger group, we can start installing the trigger. The first thing we'll do is we'll take this rear takedown pin out. It is captured, so you don't have to worry about losing it. You'll split the upper and lower, and you can see in here is the trigger pocket. We will take our trigger group, and I like to take my thumb and hold the bolt catch up a little bit so it's not in the way of the trigger group here. I will then take the pack and rotate it a little bit forward because we want to have the trigger spring tails forward here. All right, we want to make sure that the trigger spring doesn't get caught on the bottom of the lower here. So I usually take my thumb and push the trigger spring forward a little bit and then rotate the whole trigger pack a little bit forward. We'll put the front in first, and then we'll push the back down so that it's flush with the lower. All right, next we'll put on our Selector stickers. There is a left and a right. The way you can remember which way it goes is the two bullets go forward. So we know this one is the left side and this one is the right side. So now we'll go and install those. All right, as we put on these Selector stickers, we want to make sure that they are centered as best as possible around the Selector hole and level. So we'll do our best to put that on there, and then we'll press it down. And there we go. And then we'll flip it over and do the other side. We'll take off the sticker off the backing here, like so. And do the same thing with centering it on the hole and making it as level as possible with these top two surfaces right here. All right, now that we have the stickers on, we will install the Selector. Selector gets installed from the left side of the gun, so we'll lift the gun up here. We'll take our Selector. It has a little groove here, an installation groove. We want to put that dead center up. Then we will take the Selector, and at a 45-degree angle with the paddle, we will push the Selector all the way through until it clicks and the paddle is flush with this side of the housing. All right, now that we've installed our Selector with our long paddle, we will now install our short paddle here. It's easiest if you put your Stribog down flat here. We will take our short paddle. You can see it has a little shelf here, and there is a matching shelf on the Selector here. We will put it on in the safe position, just like the safe position on the long. We will take our Torx screw and place it through the Selector. And our Torx wrench, we will tighten down the screw here. And we want to make sure that this Selector paddle is flush just like the other side. Otherwise you might need to wiggle a little bit so that it's those two surfaces are up against each other. We'll take the actual wrench part and tighten it and make sure it's tight. And that's our Selector installed. All right, now that we have our binary firing system installed into our Stribog SP9, before you can go out to the range and have some fun, we gotta make sure it's safe, so we'll do some dry tests. All right, so our first test in our dry fire checklist, with the Selector in the safety position, we will pull the trigger and make sure that the hammer does not drop. All right, the next test we'll do is the semi to safe test. So we will rotate the Selector to the semi position, and it should be straight up and down. We will then pull the trigger in a safe direction, and you should hear the hammer fall. we will rack the gun to reset the hammer. Then we will rotate the selector to the safe position and then let go of the trigger, and you should hear the trigger reset. All right, next we'll do the semi function. We will take the selector and move from the safe position to the semi position. We will then pull the trigger in a safe direction. We will hold the trigger down, pull the charging handle back to reset the trigger, and then we will release the trigger and you should hear the hammer go to the sear. Next, we'll do the semi to binary scenario 1. So the first thing we'll do with the selector still in the semi position is we will pull the trigger in a safe direction. We will rack the bolt with the trigger held to the rear. Then we will take our thumb and push the selector forward, and the selector should not move into the binary position. And then we let go of the trigger and you can hear the system reset. All right, the next test we'll do is the semi to binary scenario 2. So just like the last test, we'll have the selector in the semi position. We will then pull the trigger in a safe direction. You'll hear the hammer fall. We'll then rack and the bolt. And with the trigger still held back, we will push the selector forward. And with pressure on the selector, we will let go of the trigger. Nothing should happen at that point. We will then put our finger back on the trigger, let go of the selector, and then let go of the trigger, and you should hear the hammer reset to the sear. All right, now we'll do the binary scenario 1. So from the last test, we had the selector in the semi position. We will push it forward into the binary position. Then we will pull the trigger, and you'll hear the hammer fall and hit the firing pin. We will then rack the bolt with the trigger still held to the rear, and then we will release the trigger, and you'll hear the hammer fall again onto the firing pin. We will then hold our trigger finger at the point where it just released. We will then rack the bolt again and then release the trigger, and you should hear the trigger reset to the sear. Now we will do the binary firing mode test number 2, or scenario 2. With the selector still in the binary position, we will pull the trigger in a safe direction. We will then rack the bolt while the trigger is held to the rear. We will then release the trigger slowly until the hammer drops onto the firing pin. With our trigger finger held at that point, we will then rack the bolt again, and then we will pull the trigger. At this point, nothing should happen when you pull the trigger until you release it again. So we will release the trigger again until it hits the firing pin. We'll rack the bolt again, and with our finger still in that position, we will then release the trigger and it should reset. For our final dry test, we will do the intermodal travel between the binary and semi modes, also known as cancellation. We will start with the selector in the binary position. We will then pull the trigger in a safe direction. We will hold the trigger back and rack the bolt. And with the bolt racked, we will then rotate the selector from the binary position to the semi position with the trigger still held to the rear. And then we will release pressure on the trigger. You should hear the trigger or the hammer go from the disconnector to the sear. And then once we are finished with our last test here, we will then move the selector into the safety position. All right, everyone, now that we've finished all of our dry safety tests, now we can go out on the range. Just remember all the cardinal safety rules, and I'll see you all out there.